Evening, everybody. Thanks very much for joining me this evening. I just wanted to kind of talk this week a little about the harsh reality that sometimes you're not always popular as a coach. And I think this weekend probably highlighted that a little bit more than some of the other ones. Obviously, as you've seen over the past couple of weekends and the last couple of videos, we've not had that many games. It's been second team games and things. It's been a cup run, and then I wasn't available for one of the ones that took place a couple of weeks ago. So kind of being back in the saddle and being back in charge kind of reminded me of a couple of things about coaching. I think first and foremost, I'm really proud of the team for Saturday's effort. We made hard work of the game. There was a lot of things where just doing dumb stuff in really promising positions, a knock on or a drop ball out of a line out or kicking it through where there's nobody chasing. And really frustrating, and then not defending mistakes, kind of having all the ball, having all the possession in the first sort of 10-20 minutes, and then coming away with nothing and then conceding the first time that opposition come into our half. So we're getting there, we're learning, but it's still a frustration that we're just not quite doing that quicker. Although having said that, I must say that we came away with the draw in the end, and I think quite generally that sort of 6 months ago that potentially would have been a loss rather than a draw. So really proud of the boys that they played right until the 80th minute, and we had a kick in the last second. I think it was the last play of the game to try and win it, and kudos to the kicker for stepping up and thinking, yeah, I'm going to have a go from 40 metres. It's certainly not something I'd be able to kind of do. But yeah, frustrating in the end. It could have played out differently, but proud of the effort that we kind of put together. But Saturday really showed that actually, like I said, you're not always popular as a coach. You have to make decisions, you have to make changes, you have to get people on the field. Again, remember we were talking about sort of amateur and grassroots rugby here. No one gets paid for being there. People pay to play, so they want to play, they want to be on the field, they want to be there for as long as possible. And as the head coach, I try and take a step back from kind of all the entertainment and all the sort of the team bonding things, because for me, it's very difficult then if I become just one of the lads to make decisions in games based on actually what I'm seeing rather than sort of unconscious or conscious bias of thinking, oh, well, I'm friends with that person, so they're going to stay on the field. I want them to continue to do that. And of course, I have bonds and I have friendships with the boys that are around. Well, how could you not? We see each other 3 times a week. And, as I've said before, being in a sporting team, especially a rugby team, where you go through sort of physical combat with those people around you, you do build really strong relationships and really strong friendships. But I try and take a step back and I try and take any of that unconscious bias or conscious bias out of any decisions that I make. And, on a weekend, I'm looking for people who are struggling. I'm looking for people who aren't quite up to the pace of the game, people who have made mistakes or are struggling to get back, look like they might be injured. Last week, I talked about trying to highlight weaknesses in teams and really open up teams by going through their weaknesses. And the vice versa is the same for us. As a coach, I'm looking for where are the weaknesses in our team? Where are the weaknesses that teams are going to try and expose and try and kind of get the better of us in those aspects. So I'm looking at it from that point of view. And actually, Saturday really highlighted the fact that, when I make a substitution and bring somebody off, they're not always going to agree with me, and that's fine, and that's completely understandable. As a player, if I was brought off the field, of course I'm not going to be happy. Of course I don't agree the fact that I was behind the pace of the game, or I looked like I was injured. There's not many players that are going to come up to you and go, oh, by the way, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. If you did that week in, week out, you'd probably never play rugby, because most people go into games with injuries and come out of games with even more injuries. So I think it really highlighted the fact that as a coach, and especially as a head coach, you have to take a step back and actually see what is in front of you and try not to let any favoritism or wanting to keep your best players on the field kind of cloud your judgment about what's actually happening. Are those people in the game? Are they making an impact? Is it okay for their own safety to still be out there? And I think that's really, really important. And I think it is difficult sometimes. As a coach, as I've said before, it can be a very, very lonely place in terms of making those decisions. And you can feel isolated away from kind of the team and away from that sort of lad environment, certainly in the team that I'm dealing with. But ultimately, you're making decisions and you're making changes based on what is right for the game and what's right for the team at that moment in time. And ultimately, everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to come off that field with that joy and that elation of having been through some difficult stuff together and really get over that line together, however that might look. And I appreciate that people within that context and within that team might not be happy with the choices or decisions that have been made. And I'm quite happy to shoulder that responsibility as a coach. And I know my coaching team around me are exactly the same. We're happy to make the harder decisions based on that. And as a coach, for those coaches out there, have you had this situation where you've had to make a difficult call, whether that be selection or in-game? And are you like myself, where that kind of keeps you up a little bit, that overthinking side of things, of thinking, oh, how would I feel in that situation? Because hopefully people one day will see that it was for the overall benefit of the team and not just an ego hit.